All right. Hello, everybody. This is Joshua, also known as Yashu, and today we are tuning into TLOY Talks, episode 4. And in this very unique day, our special guest is an executive producer for Christina Jones and Kimiko Ishizaka. He's the sole reason the songs on You Were My Compass by Christina Jones got written in the first place. He has over 30 years in the music industry and a side career in tech, and also an experienced web slash podcaster as he hosts his own show. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Robert Douglas. So, Robert Douglas, how are you doing today?
Hey, great, Yashu. Thanks. And thanks for the great intro and for having me on the show.
That's very great. So, I'd like to get it started for a bit too. So, where are you from? And tell us more about the place that you're from, also.
I'm a Midwesterner. I was born and raised in Michigan. And if you want to know where, and you're watching the video, it's the intersection of 127 and I-94. It's called Jackson. And when I traveled around the country as a young person, then I was always from Jackson, Michigan, which is the home of the largest state penitentiary, which is what we're known for. So I was always known as, the guy from the prison town.
True. I think like even with prison towns too, like they do have like an interesting culture in that sense too, because in television and like in movies, they talk about like the remnants of, growing up in those prison towns where
Oh,
only
yeah.
people who work in prisons are like CEOs or people who work in the diners and like hotels and stuff like that. Like Oz, for like one example, like they had it like in upstate New York, and I think one of the main characters lived in Attica at the time too. And then you also have like famous ones, like the one in Colorado, and then you have Alcatraz, and then like a variety of like other ones too. So
We're not as famous as Alcatraz, but it's absolutely true that prison town culture actually permeates everyday life. My father taught in the prison there, taught music, and he would explain about getting in there and meeting with the inmates and getting out of there, and how it's not quite like going to school every day. It's a little bit different. And my next door neighbor, my best friend when I was growing up, his father actually worked for the prison as well. So the prison as an employer and as a presence in the community was always felt.
yeah, exactly. And would you say that, like growing up, it was a good experience that you had, or would it be like
My
very
personal childhood growing up, it was delightful. I have the best parents on earth.
no doubt. And usually every person too, like when they deal like with like growing up, they have like an initial goal or an idea that they have. So do you like back at that time, did you have like anything that you wanted to do like when you wanted to grow up for a career or like for a
Oh,
job?
definitely. I decided really early on what I wanted to do, and it was music. I was 10 years old, which is, in the world of real famous musicians, 10 years is already pretty much over the hill, right, for getting started. But that's when I got started as a French horn player. And I decided very quickly that I wanted to do that. And in fact, I did. I studied French horn throughout high school and into college. And that's what actually brought me to Germany. That and my love interest brought me to Germany, and I played French horn in orchestras here in Germany before moving on to my tech career, which is now 20 years ago. I'm feeling very old with all these decades that we're throwing around. 30 years in the music industry, 20 years in the tech industry. It's like, me? Who? Me? I'm not that old. Oh, wait, I am.
No doubt. Like initially for me, I wanted to be like a teacher actually, because, going to school, you're only exposed to like what you see in life and like what people do. And like that was like being a teacher. And it was actually like very interesting too, because I actually like low key wanted to be like an English teacher, because I do feel like, it's kind of simple. You understand stuff, you teach books, you teach grammar, and then like when you get that weird reality when they tell you like, hey, like it might be like different because of like the cutbacks and the money, you start to like realize a lot of other stuff too. So that's what got me into like studying like other aspects in life, like law and crime and all that type of stuff too. And then also my initial interest, like music and podcasting. So, and here we are, like the music and podcasting type thing.
Yeah. Well, what you said is true. You want to do what you see, and in that respect, I had a very strong father figure present in my life who is a musician, and he and I actually played in multiple ensembles together. And he was a conductor, and I played in the ensembles he conducted. And all of his friends that he brought over to family meetings and everything were always musicians, but it was always in the kind of the classical scene. So he and I played in the local symphony orchestra together, the Jackson Symphony. We sat right next to each other, in fact, French horn, trombone. It was pretty amazing that we got to play together so much. And it's absolutely true that you want to do what you see. I remember, for example, as a very young child, he would be rehearsing with his brass quintet in our living room, and I just lay in the middle of it and just soak up the sound. And absolutely, that influenced me and pushed me in that direction. And later in life, I also identified a very strong urge and desire to make him proud through my musical achievements, which I was like, okay, I'm glad I know that's there. Now, when that little voice is urging me to do things, I can understand where it's coming from and understand and process it better and make my decisions with a little more self-awareness. But it was all very much, his influence that pushed me into that career. He didn't push me. He was very hands-off, and he let me make my own decisions. But I had that feeling that he was really proud when I chose music. And, it was obviously a wonderful connection for us to play together and be in the same ensembles together.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I don't know if that was like your initial like first introduction to music, or have you ever had like a certain thing that like introduced you to like making music or being in love with like music in general by
Oh
any
yeah.
chance?
I know my origin story. There are two actually, and I think they're both worth telling. The first origin story that I have is that we went back when I grew up in the old days. We didn't have like VCRs. Okay, I predate VCRs. That's how old I am. So if you wanted to go see a recorded visual image of any kind, you needed a movie projector, and we didn't have one. So we'd go to the local library and watch movies. The library would host movie events where everybody'd sit around the projector, spinning this thing, making the movie up on the wall, and they'd advertise the times when that was going to happen. So we saw a movie called The White Seal. If anybody out there has seen The White Seal, great for you. You're old like me, or you saw it on YouTube. I saw it on YouTube recently. You can find The White Seal, and they use the music from Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. And after we saw The White Seal as a child, I was 5 or 6. I said, what's that music? Or my dad said, hey, that music from that movie that you just liked, I've got that on a record at home. And I ended up falling in love with Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. They put it on when I was falling asleep. So imagine the turntable and the stereo on the ground floor, and I was up in my bedroom, and they would blast it as loud as it would go so that I could hear it up in the upstairs bedroom. And if you know Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, you know that like the fourth movement is a storm, and Beethoven wrote a storm that comes with trombones and drums, and all hell breaks loose. And my goal was always, as a child, to stay awake in bed until that storm came. Sometimes I made it, sometimes I fell asleep more in the pastoral scenes that come before that. That's origin story number 1. Origin story number 2 actually predates that. So when I was a high schooler, so later in time, I went to Hong Kong on a band tour. And in Hong Kong, I bought my very first Walkman and my very first cassette tapes. And those were the first conscientious decisions that I was ever able to make as a being about what music I listened to myself, my music. Okay. And I didn't know what to buy. I was in a cassette store trying to buy tapes for my Walkman, and I didn't know any of it. Okay. So I picked a couple things. I think I got Linda Ronstadt, Lionel Richie, and Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel. I had no idea what I was doing. Okay. Not bad choices looking back at it. So I was away from home on a band tour, very far away from home, China. And I put Bridge Over Troubled Water on. And I swear to you, from the first note, I was reduced to an emotional pool of jelly, just crying from homesickness. And I couldn't understand it. The other two tapes were fine, but they didn't have that effect on me. And I didn't really know this music, okay? This was not what we had in our ambience. We had Beethoven 6 in our ambience, right? So I was here listening, Bridge Over Troubled Water, just crying. And it took me a long time to figure it out, but it actually turns out that's what my mom sang when we were like nursing, and she had that album and it broke later and we didn't have it later in life. And we had listened to this as a mother-child pair in my natal days, and it all came back to me. So that's the kind of connection that I had with music.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think for me too, like I wasn't really as like crazy like listening to like music that back then, but I'd say like maybe like one of my first origins like was just like listening like in the car too, like whatever like they play like on like the radio or like their like cassette like their cassettes stuff. So usually they'd play like more like traditional music from back home. So like I'm Ethiopian, so they
Oh,
would
okay.
play like a lot of like Ethiopian based music, like Amhara like type music. So I'd hear that. They'd play
Amazing.
like some like some like certain mixes like like from the like early 2000s. So they would play like Outcast, they would play like Cher and all that. Like Do You Believe, like that song right there, like was like listening to that almost like every single time in the car. And I'd say like some Jennifer Lopez, like Alicia Keys, and then it kind of like resonated with me like as I got older. Like I would initially like memorize that sound from somewhere, so like usually like when I had the access to like the internet, like as I got older, I'd type like the lyrics or I'd type the song, and then it would be interesting, like, hey, I just found out like a song that I listened to from a while back, I found out the name now. So the recognition and just the understanding of like beat patterns, like lyrics, just vocal ranges, like it hits onto you like as you get older, like as the brain starts to like develop as well. So yeah.
I think you're onto something there. In fact, I have a theory that is non-scientific, but it's my theory that we have very strong musical impressions from very early in life that basically set us up to have pretty fixed taste universes. And that I don't think many people actually truly break out of those taste universes that are created for them early in life. Yes, we go explore. I learned to like jazz. I learned to like opera. I learned that I'm really not such a hip hop fan. Okay. There's some that I do like, some that I don't, but it's not my thing. Right. So we never break out of these early influence taste things. And I think this is exactly why the record industry focuses so myopically on young people. It's like young people don't even necessarily have purchasing power when they're young, but they're making a long-term investment. If they market to preteens now, when they're in their formative years, when they're having those like first social proof experiences in junior high school, and like later, those are their golden oldies, then the industry can sell to them for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I think that people my age mostly go to Spotify, not to discover something they've never heard before. If they do, it's like a, it's an exhibition piece. It's interesting to listen to once and then go away from. But mostly people are looking for things they either already know or stuff that sounds so much like it that it reminds them of it, so that they can just like fill out that space that they like a little more densely. And I think this is interesting to understand as music producers, because it's frustrating trying to get people to listen to your music. Most people won't do it. Most people won't listen, not really listen, not with an open heart where like, this could be my new favorite song. No, you're gonna have to find young people for that, really young people. And if you're not like accustomed to talking to teenagers, that's not young enough, right? You need those teenagers or younger. So I think this is, as a music producer, it took me a long time to realize that, like, unless I was making music that sounded really like what somebody already liked as an old person, they're not going to listen to it. They'll never listen to it, no matter how much I talk it up, no matter how attractive I make it sound, no matter how context I give them, contextual, the backstory, the technical, no, forget it.
Yeah, nah, I definitely know what you mean. And, I do realize this, with people as they grow up too. Like, I know with some people, if they like listen to like some like favorite songs like back in like certain years, like from a certain artist, they're less likely to be introduced to like a new artist because they think that, it's all the same, or, it's just the similar sounds, just the different person. So, like, let's say if you have like a hit song back in like 2014 and 2015, and you like that specific artist or the specific artists that match into your style. Nowadays too, like when you hear like new music or you try to get introduced to new music, most people do get reluctant to like listening to that artist, because if I could listen to X, Y, and Z, why would I listen to like ABC like right there? It's, as you said, like more
That
younger
almost
people.
sounds like the lyrics of a song, by the way. ABCXYZ.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's kind of like with some people, like if like I'm like hip to new music sometimes too. Like right now, like not as much as I used to like back then, but I kind of get like hip to it here and there. So like whether it's like an unknown artist or from a specific artist from a specific scene, I'll try my best to spread the word in that sense. But then other people, they're gonna listen to music, that they've liked from like 2013, 2014, 2015. Even some people, like, they'll still cling on to that whole 2000 sound. So even if you try to introduce someone to the likes of like a West Side Gun or a Conway, like, this is just like in hip hop perspective, they want to still listen to like 50 Cent and Eminem, because if I could get it from them, like the lyrics, the styles, the versatility, why should I listen to like a new act as well? So that's kind of like how to sum it up in that sense. So yeah.
I had to chuckle while you were relating all that, because you kept mentioning the years 2014 and 15. I was like, way back then when I was 42. Like,
Yeah.
way back then.
Yeah.
So long ago.
Yeah. No doubt. So aside from, the band like stuff, did you had like any formal music training in like, and what was the experience like for you, like aside if from the band stuff, if you like learned some other like
Yeah, I learned
sounds?
how to play piano. And then, of course, I studied my major instrument, the French horn. And when you do that, then both of those instruments, you learn to read music, you learn to sight read, you learn to play in ensembles with other people where they're reading music, and you can basically sit down and read the music that's on the page together. I did not learn improvisation. So I didn't learn like the jazz approach to seeing a lead sheet with chords and melodies, and then to work around that with your instrument in an improvisatory way and make something new. Didn't learn that. I also didn't learn any aspect of what we call these days music production, because guess what? When the Apple II computer came out and you could like make a little, program that like repeated hello world going up and down the screen, I was already like in junior high school. Okay. So like we didn't have Pro Tools. Pro Tools was like way in the future at that point. So, if I had wanted to like learn the modern techniques at that time, it would have been possible. I would have only had to go from Jackson to Detroit, where Eminem was making his mark. I mean, like I'm basically a contemporary with Eminem. So it was possible. It's just that my background was so focused on the orchestral classical tradition that everything that I learned had to do with harmonies and music theory and playing, symphonies, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I think for me too, kind of started off like playing the piano. Like, my parents like bought a piano, and just kind of learned like how to like test it out, like see what to play. And it was kind of like one of those like electric like keyboard slash piano type things where
Yeah.
like like the keys, like the white keys would tend to like be colorized like if you're learning like a certain song. So if you're playing like We Got the
Some
Beat,
people
or
see it that way, by the way.
yeah,
When we start talking about Christina Jones, she's one of the people on earth who actually see music with colors. So it's very interesting that you had a piano with colors like that.
yeah. And it was actually like auto sync to like learn like how to play like those certain things too. So like you'd had to like learn how to test it out. Sometimes it would play like automatically for you.
Mhm.
Sometimes you'd have to like learn it on your own. Sometimes you press one key, you press the other key too, and then it would work that way too.
I would have
So
loved that as a kid, by the way. I mean, the most exciting electronic thing in my childhood was Pac-Man. In the Howard Johnson's store, the restaurant. So when we'd go on family vacation, for example, I'd always look for the Howard Johnsons because they would have Pac-Man. And if I was lucky, after we paid for dinner, there'd be a quarter left over and I could play one game of Pac-Man before we got in the car. So just cultural context here. That's how it was. We didn't have Game Boys or anything like that, or whatever you people play these days.
true. I want to get into that like later on, like the whole Pac-Man thing. But yeah, as far as like other stuff, I like learned to play the recorder like back in elementary school, and then I started off
That's a good
playing,
starting instrument. It is.
yeah, pretty much. And then I started off playing the trumpet in like middle school, and then maybe like for 1 year in high school, and that was it. And I think middle school, like it was a good experience to like learn more about sheet music, just the styling of like how to play like one note than the other, and then like which notes you have to play. So like if you're playing on like a treble clef versus playing on on a bass clef, like you
Mhm.
would realize like the major like differences. And then high school, like we didn't have that much like like instrumental time. We just like learned like the basic formations of music. So we started off like reading like certain papers from how music was made like in the Chopin era, the Bach era, Mozart, and then got into some instrumental time and before like we performed like this choir thing like back then for like this like middle school, like maybe like in the Christmas time, and I'd say it was worth it in that sense too. I mean, I thought we were just strictly playing our instruments, but it was just like a whole different thing. But yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned, choir and all, doing all these diverse instruments. As I grow older, I have more of my life to look back on and play the revisionist game. What would my life have been like if I had done something different? Invest in Microsoft stock, go meet Bill Gates, something like that. But no, when I think about the musical journey, and I think, if I had done something different, what would have turned out to be like, then I'm really actually somewhat regretful that I didn't learn to sing early on and maybe learn a more contemporary instrument like electric bass. I can see myself as a young person being a bass player and a singer in a band, for example. Hello, Paul McCartney. But I would really like to go back in history to the 80s and tell myself back then to sing, because I didn't think I could sing back then. But I probably couldn't, and I probably can't now. But what I've learned through trying to learn to sing on my own in the past few years is that no matter where you start, you can get a lot better at it if you practice, which is not surprising because that's the way most things in life work. You get much better at them if you practice them, and musicians practice a lot. And I learned how to practice from my musical studies, so I've been practicing singing. And I would love to go back in history and I would just like to be Lionel Richie, by the way. If we ever do the 80s over again, I'm going to be Lionel Richie.
No doubt. Well, we're like aside from like what you listen to like back in China and from like home, like did you have like any artists or sounds that you listened to throughout like your lifetime in that sense?
Um, Well, I'm really interesting in that respect, in that my core was strictly classical music, so the Beethoven's symphonies and stuff like that, the whole universe. And my ambient influences was 80s radio. So like, if you want to hear what I listened to when I was growing up, it was basically top 40 80s music. So it was Madonna, Lionel Richie, it was, you know, Bruce Springsteen, it was Michael Jackson, it was Cyndi Lauper. And those things actually have, even though I didn't pay much attention to them when I was growing up, because I was kind of like, that music is clearly inferior to Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, even though I was a little bit like that. Also something that I got from my dad a little bit. He's over it now. That era of top 40 pop music is really attractive to me now. I love it. I love going back and listening to the 80s hits. I can't help myself.
No doubt. At what point, like in your life, did you start making music on your own, like in that sense?
So remember, I didn't learn to improvise, and I never became a composer. So I only tried a couple times to write lyrics, and I only tried a couple times to actually write songs, and none of it worked out very well. So what I've been able to do as a creative musician has mostly been focused around enabling better musicians than myself to make their music at a very high level. And I started that in 2012, so quite late. And I started that also in the classical scene with Kimiko Ishizaka, who is my wife and who's a pianist. And we've done a number of projects together, making albums for her, which I was the executive producer for. And in those cases, I was not even really the artistic director so much. I was mostly the project manager form of executive producer. Executive producers are really not well-defined term. And if you hear somebody use it, you have to ask them literally, what do you mean by that? Or you have no idea what they're talking about. For some people, it's just who pays the check. I did that as well. But in our case, it was who organizes everything, who makes the decisions, like who's the recording engineer, where's the studio that we're going to do it, who listens the most to the, you know, the edits and the cuts that the engineers are making, who does the marketing, who does the promotion. For me, that's what executive producer means. It's like everything except sit down and play the instrument or do the specialized tasks along the way, like the recording engineer or the editor. So in none of the albums where I've been involved have I been the one who was like working in Pro Tools making cuts, but I was listening to everyone. I was listening to everyone and being the artistic director at some level. And that level of being an artistic director has increased over time to the point where with the Christina Jones album, I would say that I was, you know, more important than executive producer. I was the artistic director, because every decision about all of the musicians who were chosen eventually came back to me. So we had some people helping with that, like the arranger, Corey Allen, actually had the context, the individual musicians, but he was sending me samples of what they were doing. And I was saying, yes, no, no, yes, that, but more like Pink Floyd, and that, but more like Jethro Tull and stuff like that.
I see what you mean. And in most cases too, like I know since you weren't the one like that was like making the music, you were just doing like the behind the scenes type stuff with like marketing and promotion. So to speak more on like the artists in general, did they have like a creative process like for making music? So like would Christina's process be different than Kimiko's, or?
Oh yes, it has to be. This is almost a question that you don't need to ask, because if you look inside yourself, you can know even from your own self that everybody is highly unique in this respect. And maybe there are some things that different people do that look the same, but at the core, everybody's creative process is unique. You can't even say very unique or extraordinarily unique or highly unique like I did. You could just leave it at unique and let the true meaning of the word stand. Nobody does it the same way.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And as far as like seeing like them like like being involved in the industry. How did you like immerse yourself like in the music industry, like with releasing Kimiko's music and with Christina's like music as well?
I'm a music industry outsider. The music industry doesn't really like me very much, so that's not an appropriate question to ask. With Kimiko, we gained recognition by basically being oppositional to the music industry. So for context on that, you have to understand that in 2012, that those were the years when the music industry, the RIAA, et cetera, were suing individuals for downloading files from the internet, for using BitTorrent, for using Napster. You would read stories like somebody's mom got sued because their son downloaded something in their bedroom and listened to it. And then people just wanted something like Spotify. Okay, they just wanted to be able to explore music and listen to the music that they wanted. They weren't trying to cheat people or steal people or make the millionaire musicians less millionaire. They were just loving music, and the industry was responding by breaking them and beating them as hard as it could. And we didn't like that. So what we did is we recorded a piece, Bach's Goldberg Variations, back to classical, and we set the masters for that recording, which normally we would have a copyright on. We put them straight into the public domain. We said, anybody, anywhere on earth, from now until the end of time, can do anything with this music that you want, no restrictions. And it's really funny what some of the people have done. It's wonderful and funny. But that got a lot of attention. We got written about in major magazines like the New Yorker, okay, or Wired magazine, or in Germany, the FAZ or Heise.de. So we got really an extraordinary amount of coverage because it was quite a revolutionary idea to give up your copyright to a recording that you just made from day one. And we also used Kickstarter to fund that. So we had a very strong story. Help us set Bach free from the grips of the evil music industry. Like a lot of, like hand waving and hubris involved with that. But people loved it because remember, the music industry was literally beating them with lawsuits at the time. And it was awful. And people basically hated the music industry at the intellectual property protection level. There are lots of side stories there. So that kind of put me on a trajectory to be outside of the music industry. I've not really found my way back into it. There's no like warm, hey, you're one of us from Warner Brothers moment on my history. No.
No doubt. Yeah, I remember like back then, like that whole like download situation with Napster and zip torrents and everything like that was a major problem back in like the 90s and 2000s too, like when you had like people like Lars Ulrich and like all these like industry heads were against people like downloading their music because like imagine like working hard in the studio and then basically your album being like downloaded for free in which you expected others to pay. Like for some people, like you do have to understand that there are also like cultural contexts into like buying music, because you can listen to music on the street for free or like find it on YouTube. So what's like the actual difference like downloading like like a certain like mainstream song like on YouTube in that sense too? But like if we look into like context into that whole idea of like Bandcamp and artists like selling like independent artists selling their music on like other platforms and expecting that certain support, it has like a weird like cognitive like dissonance towards like what Lars Ulrich was saying and what these like industry heads are talking about, because both groups are promoting people to support them, to buy their music, like buy their merch, and like get like a ticket for like their upcoming show like on tour and all that. So it has like that whole like interesting understanding too, because both groups want the same thing, but both have like different aspects to like how they view like the industry in that sense too, as to where like independent and like unsigned artists are usually against like the music industry and the politics beyond it, while like label heads will do like anything for like the industry, you know, like they'll do anything what it takes to stay like in the public eye, or in that sense,
Oh
either in
yeah.
music or in entertainment. So
And I think that sometimes the techniques might even be slightly underhanded, but fortunately, no hitmen have shown up at my door, and I've given up hope of ever being signed by Sony or anything. It's not going to happen, and in fact, you know, with the decentralized web and DeFi and NFTs and crypto. Um, Actually, the industry is going to go through another tumultuous change, probably on the order of magnitude of, you know, the CD or streaming or iTunes. And it's starting this year, and you're seeing it, the signs of it, and people can't even begin to imagine what's coming. They can't. It's mind blowing. I've been looking into what's possible with NFTs. And it's much deeper and more spectacular than, you know, collecting some crypto kitties or just like, you know, getting access to a track. That's not the future of this technology. The future of this technology is going to change the ownership model of music licensing, basically. So it'll be fun. I can't predict exactly where it's going either. I'm not the oracle. I just know that, you know, the protectionist aspect of the music industry that thinks that it was good in the past, I want it to be like that again. It's as useless as me thinking I'm going to be Lionel Richie in the 80s.
no doubt. I mean, if they're gonna like push to make like certain people that were famous from like 2008 like relevant again, like Lady Gaga or Katy Perry, then you know they can do that too. But I do feel that like even with certain people who want to get into the industry, like in the, you know, like in a label or like in that whole like mainstream sense, like you could do it off the strength of your own music, and you don't need to be signed to like a label or anything like that. Just own your masters, like own like
You
whatever
can.
publish. Yeah.
It's really hard and very unlikely that you'll succeed. Statistically seen, you're probably going to fail. You're going to spend all your money and all your time and be very frustrated. Statistically, not to discourage anybody out there, because it's your passion and you should follow your passion. And I'm glad that I always did. But it's really hard. I mean, how many thousands of tracks are uploaded to Spotify every day? How do you get anybody's attention in that world? It's incredibly hard. So, and I say that feeling like I'm an utter failure in doing so, even though I've had bigger resources and more time and some good ideas and some bad ideas along the way to try to do that for the music that I'm trying to promote. I feel that it's so hard getting people's attention that it's like the least fun thing in life to do, to try to get people's attention to pay attention to your music. And if you don't get their attention, you make the music and it dies a death of obscurity. And that's what's happening to so many people right now. They're making so much music and nobody's listening to it. Okay, I read a sad statistic about a certain percentage of tracks on Spotify that don't even have any listens. Okay, it's like somebody took the time to put it on there and then nobody came. Okay, so I love the indie music story, and if you cream off the top of the crop and say, oh, they all made it, and you know, like you got this group of 100 people that you could point to right now who have made it. Guess what? There are 20,000 people, 30,000 people, 50,000 people beneath them who are not making it at all and are consigned to obscurity. So just so if you're out there and you know you're like thinking about how you're going to spend your time, absolutely make the music. Absolutely invest in your skills and explore the music, and just know that the joy that you get from doing that is probably the payment that you're going to get. And if you pin your happiness to any sort of social recognition for it, or validation from other people that you've made good music, or that they like your music, or anything like that, you're setting yourself up for frustration, because it's a shitty industry. It's horrible.
Yeah, exactly. In that sense, I think that was just kind of like the good start to speak on. just moving on to our next question. So I know that Kimiko was is your wife, and you worked with Christina like from the start, like from before Kimiko, like after Kimiko. So but how did you guys like meet? Like just you, Christina, and Kimiko, like in that sense.
Well, you have to, I mean, if I'm going to tell that story, then you have to indulge me to reveal something more personal about it. And that Kimiko and I had been married for nearly 20 years, at a point about 3 years ago, when I decided to leave. I decided that it wasn't working, and that I had my own frustrations, and frustrations with her, and frustrations with the situation in life. And I basically packed my bags and left. And I began to start a new life somewhere else. And we were separated for most of a year. And that was obviously a very hard thing for both of us, but especially for Kimiko, who didn't necessarily see it coming or expect that I would do that. And in that time, she went through many different phases of dealing with loss. Okay, so she really believed that she had lost me. I tried to make it very clear that I had really moved out. There was no fixing it. There was no getting back together. It was over. Okay, I was very adamant about that. And she took it to heart, and she basically was processing that loss. And part of what she did in processing that loss was she wrote songs. And she wrote songs basically to me without hope, without intention at first that anything would change. And at some point, she actually sat down and sang them for me. So we stayed in contact. There was no animosity. We weren't fighting. And we were, actually still working on a music project together. So we were friends, so to speak. So we were seeing each other in that context, and she sang these songs for me. She sat down on the piano, and like we just both bawled our eyes out and cried. And I realized all sorts of things about how I felt that had been buried, but they came up with this music that she had just written and had performed for me. And yeah, I still walked out the door and went back to where I was setting up my new life. And it took several months and more songs that she wrote with increasing intention of having an effect on me to actually convince me that we should move forward together. And I came back to her. I left what I had been building elsewhere, which was very difficult and painful, and came back, and we have since been moving forward together. So we never ended the marriage. We now have a child, which is new, which is wonderful. And when that became clear that that's how we were going to do things, then I became obsessed with producing these songs. The songs on Christina Jones' "You Are My Compass." So those are the songs that Kimiko sang to me. And I felt that they were so good and so powerful, and the backstory was interesting, that it would be a crime against humanity to not bring those out and have people hear them. So we began looking for somebody to sing them. And I am going to tell you that I literally made contact with over 1,000 singers. I used LinkedIn, I used SoundCloud, I used YouTube, I used my network. And there are singers out there who, if they see this, they'll be like, we were in contact. And for whatever reason, whether it was on their side or our side, none of it worked out. We listened to the samples and we just weren't convinced, or they couldn't imagine working with us, or they were too busy or too famous, or they never got back, or whatever. It didn't work out. And that went on for a long time. 1,000 singers is a lot of singers. And at some point, we were watching a video at the beginning of the pandemic into 2020. So January-ish, February-ish 2020. And it was a video of college students from Berkeley Conservatory who made one of those remote videos singing "What the World Needs Now Is Love." And it's a beautiful video. It's you should definitely go see it. And for 1.7 seconds, this girl up in the corner in the screen this big said, we have cornfields and wheat fields enough. That was her line. That was it. And we were like, oh, her. it's gotta be her. So we found her. We looked at the credits at the end of the video, and they scrolled on for like 10 hours because there are a lot of students at Berkeley, and she only had, like this tiny segment. And we Googled every one of them because it didn't say, hey, cornfields and wheat fields, Christina Jones. No, we had to Google every singer on that list and look at their picture and listen to them to see. And it took like hours to find Christina Jones. And then Kimiko found her on Facebook and started chatting with her. And Christina was like, woo, weird. And we had to very respectfully make this, beginning of an overture to her and a relationship with her to get her to be interested in what we were doing. And finally, she looked Kimiko up and saw that she was a real artist. We shared some of the songs with her. We actually made a demo version of Free Completely Free that I produced. Nobody heard it. Like, we did as a remote video, like 4 corners of the screen, 4 musicians, bass, drum, piano, Christina. And after that, we knew that we were going to make the album together. All during the pandemic, we've never met Christina in person. And how we made the album after that was also fairly remarkable. But I mean, to get to that point with somebody, Christina, who's never made an album before, who's basically, she was living, with her mother in St. Louis during the pandemic, couldn't go to school, to have like the people from Germany call her and say, hey, make our album. I mean, that must have been like a thunderbolt. I don't know, lightning bolt, thunder clap. Thunderbolt's a mixed metaphor.
Yeah, nah, I know what you mean. And it's interesting too, because I think Christina, you mentioned that she was like on American Idol for a bit too. So how was that like work with like an American Idol artist like Christina, like in that sense too? Because
well, I mean, she was on American Idol. She made it into the top 40. She met Lionel Richie. Lionel Richie features very heavily in this podcast. She also likes Lionel Richie. That binds us. We're both Lionel Richie fans. But, she wasn't really ready for that at that time in her life, and that didn't lead to very much for her. And it was exciting and formative for her, but in terms of launching a career, probably helped her get into Berkeley. But the American Idol story, while it's super exciting, it was basically only a glimpse into the future for her and her potential. And when I've gone and listened to the American Idol, and she'll say it too in her interviews, she wasn't ready for that. And in the 3 years or 4 years since that's happened, she's blossomed as an artist. She's turned into a completely different singer. She's developed so much. The transformation in her singing in that time is remarkable. And we could hear that in that video in 2020. And you can, and from that video in 2020 and the things that she was putting on Instagram to what she recorded for our album, For You Were My Compass, that's also a transformation. So I believed in Christina from day one. But when I heard the first takes coming out of the studio, my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what an artist we had in the studio. I couldn't believe that we'd actually been lucky enough to find somebody who could sing like that. That was amazing.
yeah, no, I definitely know what you mean. And like I read something, like I was like reading on Kimiko's like Wikipedia that she used to be like an Olympic like weightlifter.
Yeah, she's still really strong. Yes, that's Kimiko for you. When she sets her mind to doing something, she doesn't, no half measures for Kimiko. And she started when she was like 30 or late 20s, which is when most Olympic weightlifters are retiring. And she still went on to be second place in the German national championships, which is pretty remarkable. I wish I had more footage and videos from back then. We didn't have iPhones back then. Remember, we're old. So, there's not so much footage from back then, but she was pretty remarkable. She's tall, relatively tall, which is also an anti-trait for weightlifting, but she's just super determined. And when she learns something, she puts her entire heart and soul in it. And she was a successful competitive weightlifter.
I see what you mean. As far as like the executive producer situation, how did that come about? Like, did you just like joined like in that sense, like when they decided to work on the projects, or?
Oh, no, 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 no. You have to understand, these projects happen because I decide they happen.
Oh, true.
There is no force in the universe that brought these projects into Earth other than my will.
Oh, true.
Kimiko played them, and it's her genius that you hear musically, but without me, those don't exist. Christina Jones too. That project was clawed from the granite of the universe by my fingernails, chip by chip over 2 years. And that's what it means for me to be an executive producer.
I see what you mean. And I know like with the JS Box situation, that was like the sole like artist that, Kimiko like worked on like playing for the books. And how does someone like JS Bach played a role like in your life, and what
Oh,
was
good question.
what was his impact for you when composing the books, in that sense?
So Bach is interesting because he is, in my estimation, the best musician that humanity has ever produced. And anybody can come and prove me wrong. Great time for a debate. But no, in my opinion, Bach is not only wrote the highest quality music given his context at the time, but also throughout the time ensuing, but also is extraordinarily prolific and extraordinarily influential. You mentioned Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga quotes Bach, one of the pieces that Kimiko recorded at the beginning of Bad Romance. That's Bach all the way, influencing everybody from the Beatles to Lady Gaga. Everybody along the way has fallen under his influence in Western tonal music that, includes all classical, jazz, and popular music that we've been talking about. Not African, not Asian. Of course, that's a little bit different, although it's influential there. But Middle Eastern music also, different stuff, right? But for European American music, Bach has been, whether people know it or not, he's been an extraordinarily formative force. But also for me in particular, Kimiko introduced him to me. It sounds weird because I went to school and college for 8 years and have classical music degrees. But when Kimiko actually got me to listen to Bach in the right way, long enough with enough intent, then I realized what was there. And now it's a lifetime worth of discovery to find out everything there is to know about his music. There's so much of it. You would need, how do I frame this for you? Bach wrote so much music, and so much of it is so famous that it's the most famous piece in its genre, okay? For cello, for choir, for orchestras, for piano, for violin, for everybody at the time, okay? He wrote so much music that a professional music copyist would have to spend their entire career just copying it. Okay, think about that for a second. He wrote music so fast that a professional copyist would spend their entire career just keeping up.
Yeah,
it's amazing. So, aside from his great achievement, for me, it opened up a new world. It was close enough to the Beethoven symphonies that it's not really a new genre. It's just a subgenre in the classical music space that I already loved, but I hadn't ever really listened to it the right way or enough. And then when I did, I realized that it was enough music that it would occupy me for the rest of my life, getting to know it. And it's a great feeling when you like open a door to a universe that you can walk into and just like, I like it here. And it's big and it's like great. So that was a great moment. That's how Bach influenced me.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. And recently there was like this meme, like sort of like on Twitter, or sort of like on social media, on like a hip hop Mount Rushmore, or like a music Mount Rushmore, or like a television Mount Rushmore in that sense. So who would you put like in your Mount Rushmore in terms of like classical music in that sense?
Classical music, my tastes. Oh, Bach, Beethoven, Schubert. Then it gets really hard because if there are like 4 places, Bach, Beethoven, Schubert, then that 4th place, you're going to have to like rotate that between Tchaikovsky and Brahms and Richard Strauss and whoever I'm listening to at the moment, because Mozart, of course. There are too many. Okay, but Bach, Beethoven, and Schubert never leave.
Yeah. Like I know for me too, like I do listen to classical music here and there. So like for me, like I would put it like with Bach, with Mozart, with Beethoven, and then with Chopin, because I know Chopin, like he did develop
Chopin.
Chopin, like he did develop like a good sense of music and books like at that time too. And
I love Chopin.
yeah, like it's like not a lot of people like talk about him that much like within the legacy of music in that sense, but he did like lead a way.
Depends on whom you're talking to.
Yeah, because I know like some people like when they recognize like classical musics from a non-traditional like standpoint, like in a mainstream sense, people are gonna recognize Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin. Like for people who are so immersed in the classical music, like it'll be something similar to like what you mentioned in that sense too. So
I think
there's
Chopin's actually a great, and sorry to interrupt you, but I think Chopin is actually a great entry point for anybody wanting to listen to classical music. That's Chopin, Chopin. And he wrote primarily piano music, and that has some advantages to people listening with a modern ear, because it's usually very close and personal and only one instrument, not a huge orchestra in a huge orchestra hall that's overwhelming. You don't know what you're listening to, or opera singing with a huge vibrato and you've never heard somebody sing like that. Chopin's really accessible because it's the period of music is the Romantic period, and it's actually sounds romantic. It sounds very personal and emotional. And Chopin was also a little bit emo. He was a little bit depressed a lot of the time, but he was also this great melodist, and his harmonies are unbelievable. And what he does in every single piece is he delivers an emotional payload that's like, ah, and that's great. And that's a great feeling. And if you can get yourself into that and experience that, you'll want it over and over and over again. And start with the nocturnes, Chopin nocturnes. That's my tip of the day.
no doubt. And aside from the music from Christina and Kimiko, how was the impact like when like the music like was like released? Was there like a lot of like recognition that people noticed like within those projects, or would
There
it be
was from the Open Goldberg variations in particular, because of the attitude and the model that we used with the crowdfunding and the public domain aspect of it. We repeated that with the Well-Tempered Clavier and with the Art of the Fugue, which are also pieces by Bach. And it had diminishing influence because we had done it before. So you can't repeat yourself too often. It wasn't repeating ourselves in terms of the artistic creation, because those recordings actually got better and better. And Kimiko's best work is either the Well-Tempered Clavier or the Art of the Fugue, depending on what your preferences are, okay? But she developed as a pianist in that time, and her understanding of Bach developed in that time. And with the Art of the Fugue, she actually completed it because Bach died before he finished it, or it was lost. And she completed the unfinished part as a composer. And that was actually a nice elision and transition to her next album, which was then called New Me, which is a solo piano album of her own works, which combined the ideas of Bach and classical music with jazz, which she had started to study. So those 4 piano albums were the 4 that Kimiko and I did with each other before Christina Jones' You Were My Compass. So that's the 5th major album that I've been the executive producer for over these 10 years.
all right? Just to get on to our last part, so we have a part 3 like music and other topics. We just finished part 1 and part 2, like one with the humble beginnings and the other with the music and everything else. So this is just more on a general like standpoint. So what are your thoughts on like the music that's like relevant in like the mainstream today? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that it's changing so fast what's relevant and to whom it's relevant, and what the mainstream is completely dependent on where you are on earth and we can see the entire earth in its entirety from our point of view now with the internet, and it all looks bigger and smaller at the same time, that it's a really hard question to answer. And what I will tell you is that I think the freshest, nicest, newest thing that I've seen in the music industry is actually TikTok and the short form videos. And even though they butcher the songs by taking just a minute of them or 10 seconds of them or talking over them, it doesn't matter. TikTok's about having fun, and having fun with music is what it's all about to begin with. So I get lost on TikTok watching what people are doing with their dances and their choreography. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful way to like link yourself and something that you're doing yourself with a music or a sound that you really appreciate and that's meaningful to you. And I've also focused my promotion of Christina Jones a lot on TikTok and Instagram, because I love it when people listen to it and then react to it in a way that's unique to themselves, to their brand, to their presentation, whatever they hear in that, they'll show me when they make their video on TikTok. They'll show what they hear in that music. And to me, that's super valuable these days. And it's, to me, the most interesting phenomenon in the music industry that's come about in recent years. The only thing that I think will be equally big in the future is, like I said, the influence of the NFTs and the way that people start to interact with those, and how they will piece by piece create a new music industry, and the traditional music industry will start to slip inside of that and assimilate part of that, and some of it will be Warner and Sony and some of it won't be, and it'll be totally distributed, and it'll be great.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, for me, I do feel like that, like social media and other forms of like technology are like your new radio and like your new like magazine in that sense too. So if we can compare like Spotify and Apple Music and Bandcamp are like the new like iTunes and like radio in that sense too, because who really listens to the radio nowadays besides people who choose not to have an aux cord, or people that don't have like an aux cord like in their car, or like an aux cord system. Like that's like one major difference as well, because Spotify and Apple Music, you can like choose the artists who you want to listen to with like either like if you have to deal with ads or with no ads in that sense too. But yeah, like you don't have to like find out, like you don't have to listen to the top 40 artists like in transition, because in radio like the music transitions from one artist to the other, whereas like in Spotify or Apple Music you can just pick the artist that you just want to like listen to, and you can listen to them for like all day, like 24/7, or you could have like a playlist.
It's not like when I grew up. When I grew up, if you wanted to hear a song, you called the radio station and then you waited for them to play it. And there were times when I was growing up that we would call the radio station and request the same song 20 times in one day. And I'm not kidding you.
Yeah, I actually tried to do that once for like this R&B artist like in Toronto-based radio station, but I think they only had like top 40, because you know the artists that I had like new music, so like they didn't have that at the time too. But yeah, like even if you like think about it, like YouTube is strictly like the new like artist and repertoire, like even like TikTok too, because when you see like one person doing like a YouTube cover, or someone like performing on TikTok like a certain song, you know, like you don't have to go to like a record label or like to someone and give them like your demo tapes like back then, because back then you'd had to like, give your demo tape of like whatever tracks you did, and then they'd pick, you know, some people can watch a video and when they see it they would be like, that's the one right there, that's the video right there, we need to sign this artist, or we need to put this artist like in a similar platform. And you know, it worked for a lot of people who used YouTube to their advantage in that sense too. And then if we talk about like even like video interviews and like, you know, watching interviews on like platforms like Breakfast Club or Zane Lowe or all these other media platforms, they're like your modern day like magazine like as well too, like
Definitely.
and I've noticed that it caused like a lot of differences between the reduction of sales like in radio and in magazine, because you know no one's going to buy like a magazine or like listen to the radio anymore unless like they have to in that sense too. And it's an interesting feeling because what could be the YouTube of the future could be something else as well too. So we don't know what would happen because life changes like day by day, and with the amount of technology and with the amount of scientific like discovery and formation of like media like in a digital world, you see this like everlasting change happen like in our very own eyes, as to where you see stuff like radio and like magazines become like entirely existent unless like that other demographic still purchasing, still like tuning in that sense too. So yeah.
I think you hit a lot of interesting points, but I want to take it up a level, and I also have to say I need to go and the broadcast soon. So this might be the closing thing that I say, unfortunately. But when I hear what you're saying, it reminds me very strongly of a very prevalent theme in my life as an older person. I'm going to keep grabbing that mantle and wearing it. And as a parent, you also think about this, it's mortality. You think about it as a human. Any human thinks about their own mortality, but that grows and grows on you as you age and as you have dependence on you, okay? So I'm thinking with my son, how long will I be there for him? How will I take care of him until that point and beyond? And in a way, the changing of technologies like YouTube and radio and their impermanence, and how you can't count on the way that we do things now being the way that we do things tomorrow. And it's changing faster and faster all the time. So that's even more so now than it was before. So there's an impermanence, a feeling of impermanence. And you start to think, what's my legacy? What am I leaving behind as a musician, as an executive producer? What's going to happen to Kimiko's open Goldberg variations in 100 years? Who's going to listen to You Are My Compass in 100 years, 1,000 years? Is there a sense of permanence? How do I transcend my mortality? Chopin did it. Beethoven did it. They did it by writing great music on paper, and that paper survived long enough that enough copies of it exist that now it's recorded and it will never go away, just because of the quality. But how do I do that? How do I transcend my own mortality and assure the legacy of my music beyond my lifetime? And those are actually the interesting topics that I'm thinking of, and why I've mentioned NFTs quite often. We're going to be looking at the permanence of music in our next projects. And you reminded me that totally of mentioning all these technologies like radio that is not as relevant now as it used to be, and will eventually not be relevant at all. And YouTube might not be either, although it's going to be around for a long time. Don't get worried that they're turning YouTube off. They're not.
No doubt. So Robert, thank you for coming by on the 4th episode of TLOY Talks. It was a pleasure having you. And before you go, I just want to find out if you want to if you have any social media or anything else. Would you like to explain to the fans and where they could find you on social media or other platforms if they can?
Yeah, well, I am Robert Douglas with 2 S's. People who misspell my name with 1 S, they always get the reprimand that I have 2 S's on my ass. There's a story behind that as well, but I'm really only on Twitter. I'm not on Instagram. I despise Facebook. I actually think we need a thing like Facebook, but it shouldn't be Facebook. Facebook should burn. So I would rather actually direct people listening to Christina Jones and You Are My Compass, actually, because Kimiko and I are a little bit similar in that respect, in that we think that everything about us that people need to know is in the work that we're doing. So if you want to hear what Robert Douglas is as an executive producer, don't look for Robert Douglas on the internet. Look for Christina Jones, You Are My Compass.
All right. Sounds good. And this is Joshua, also known as Yashu, signing off on episode 4 of TLOY Talks. And have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.